Now we're thinking about the effects of the cytokines induced by the presence of the sepsis on the liver cells, the hepatocytes particularly. But just before we do that, I want to notice that the cytokines will affect the muscle tissue. And it will cause muscle catabolism. Muscle catabolism. Catabolism. A catabolic process is one which breaks things down. So the muscle proteins will be converted into amino acids. So sepsis-induced cytokines will start to break down proteins in the muscle and release amino acids. And the hepatocytes, also induced by cytokines, will start synthesizing acute phase proteins. And these can increase by factors of 100 or hundreds in the blood. Now, given that you don't normally feel hungry when you're ill, you have anorexia, can you see that the amino acids are necessary to supply the building blocks for the acute phase proteins? So during this emergency period when the body is threatened by potentially life-threatening infection, the amino acids from the muscle are broken down, go to the liver, and the liver converts them into acute phase proteins. So for example, you might have heard of CRP. This is C-reactive protein. Or you might have heard of another one, Serum, amyloid A protein, or SAA. So CRP and SAA are both acute phase proteins. Now, what these will do is, let's imagine that this is a bacterial cell here, which we don't want. Now, sometimes the macrophages and the monocytes that would like to phagocytose this bacterial cell don't always recognize it. So the CRP and the SAA, the serum amyloid protein, they will stick to bacteria and they will label them. Therefore, these are called, the word for this is opsonin. They are opsonins. They will opsonize the bacteria. And that will label it loudly and clearly for the destructive white blood cells to come along and phagocytose it. It's a bit like waving a red flag saying, "I'm here, come and eat me." It increases the efficiency of the phagocytosis process. So again, we can see that these acute phase proteins, the CRP and the serum amyloid A protein are both increasing the efficiency of the immune system. Now, another acute phase protein is fibrinogen, necessary, of course, for blood clotting. But that will actually tend to clump together quite a few of the red cells, forming rouleae. The rouleae. And what these are, it will tend to clump groups of red cells together like this into clumps, into columns, rouleae. And these are going to be heavier than individual red cells, So this is what's going to increase the erythrocyte sedimentation rate. Erythrocyte sedimentation rate, which is another clinical feature of sepsis and infection. So the presence of Roulier and increased erythrocyte sedimentation rate can also point to sepsis. Now, short term, the presence of these acute phase proteins is good. They will do things like activate complement. And you might remember that complement can form membrane attack protein. So stimulate complement. So complement can form membrane attack protein. So if that's a bacterial cell, the complement is basically like tubes that go through it, and it will cause the water to go in and the cell to burst. Membrane attack proteins. So basically complement kills bacteria. So it's good because the short-term effects of the acute phase proteins will stimulate complement. And the acute phase proteins will also scavenge cellular remnants and mop up free radicals and neutralize proteolytic enzymes. And they're good. But if they're there for too long, we can suffer from long-term effects of inflammation. But basically we see that these acute phase proteins, just like the leukocytosis, just like the pyrexia, are improving the immunological function of the body. So the effect of the cytokines induced by the sepsis on the hepatocytes, making the acute phase proteins, facilitated by the amino acids made available by the catabolism of muscle tissue. But actually this is one reason why if people are starving, in starvation, if people are immunocompromised, they are much less able to mount an immunological response. And they're less able to make the immunoglobulins as well. Their lymphocytes are less able to make the immunoglobulins, which of course are the antibodies. So if someone's starving and they're short of protein, if they've got diminished protein reserves in the body, especially in longer term starvation, they're going to be very immunocompromised because they can't make the acute phase proteins and they can't make the antibodies to combat the infection.